So yeah, without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it to Adam.
Great. Thank you, Jamie, and thanks for organizing everything and getting us organized. Hi, everybody. My name's Adam Desjardins. I am the co-chair alongside Indira, who is in the Zoom room. I can't see her anymore because I'm in presenter mode, but um, for the Support for Individual Artists Committee as a part of GIA. And I actually applied to the committee when I was at an arts service organization called Culture Source. So I'm based here in Detroit, working at a different entity now, but I applied at Culture Source to be a part of the committee and then joined in my new role, which is at the Fred and Barbara Erb Family Foundation, where I joined 2 years ago as an Arts and Culture Program Officer. At Culture Source, I was doing a lot of support for individual artists alongside organizations too, mostly regranting initiatives with national funders, local funders, a really wide variety of regranting initiatives. And then now at the foundation, I am working mostly with just arts and cultural organizations that fall under the portfolio of the foundation. I'll zoom out a little bit and give a little bit of a brief intro to the foundation and the work that we do, and then how we do our arts grant making, and then how that kind of led to what Margaret's going to talk about today. The Fred and Barbara Erb Family Foundation has been around for about 15 years, and we are actually now a spend down foundation. And so what that means, because I didn't know what it meant during my interview for this job, means that we're spending down the foundation's assets, and will cease to exist in the next 9 years. It's a 10-year spend down. We're 1 year in. And so that means that we are investing in the partners that we've been committed to for the past 15 years, and also, just kind of trying to continue the relationship with these grant partners to make sure that, they are able to be strong enough and survive without the foundation's funding, which they have consistently relied on year after year. Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be at the foundation. The spend down was really informed by both environmental challenges that our Great Lakes grant partners are facing, and then also just as kind of like the family was deciding, like, maybe we don't need to have this thing last forever, and it would actually be good to honor our parents who set this up while there's still memory, people who remember who they were too. And so a part of the Fred and Barbara Herbs Family Foundation's grant making portfolio is arts and culture. And what that looks like to us is and how we've supported arts and culture throughout Metro Detroit, majority in Detroit, but then a little bit in the suburbs too, is through supporting arts and cultural organizations ranging from the largest of the large institutions, whether they be the Detroit Institute of Arts or Detroit Symphony Orchestra, those types of large institutions, to smaller grassroots organizations, arts education organizations that don't really have like a building or a space, but do work in schools, dance organizations, like really the genre and breadth of type of organization, budget size, and scope of work is really vast and really diverse too. And so through that work, of focusing on arts organizations, there hasn't really been a focus on artists specifically, and the foundation doesn't have any sort of artist-specific funding. So when it comes to like me being co-chair of the Support for Individual Artists Committee, that is a consideration, right? Where it's like, okay, well, we don't support artists directly through grant making, but we do recognize that artists play a really key and, if not meaningful role, I mean, if like most essential role in supporting the work of these organizations. And many of the organizations in which we support them are led by artists and, hire artists. The majority of our grant making is general operating support. We participate in the Detroit Art Support Program, which is a collective, it's kind of like the Common App of general operating support funding for the region. So arts organizations like Margaret's apply for funding. And then that application is reviewed by 3 different foundations who then make independent decisions on general operating support funds for arts and cultural organizations. So that helps these organizations pay their people, pay their overhead, pay their artists, the really unsexy stuff that's actually really meaningful funding. And so I just wanted to uplift that too as like kind of a way in which we are doing the work and how we support organizations. So anyway, enough about the foundation and the work that I'm doing. I, as a part of my first year on the job, met with over 60 of our partners. I think we have 73 arts and culture organizations we support now. And as a part of that, and as a part of my listening tour, I wanted to get a sense of like, what are the needs of organizations we work with? What are the things that what are the ideas people have? What are the opportunities for us to support things that maybe we hadn't considered supporting before? As a funder of general operating support, we're not really, supporting the next exhibition or the next performance, and we're more supporting the really unsexy stuff like strategic planning processes or financial training or things that organizations need to sustain their work and business. And so in doing that, I met with Margaret, who I'm delighted to introduce you all to and who will introduce herself. And she had a really wonderful idea around bringing artists together and being able to organize artists in a way that we don't really have in our region. I think Detroit specifically, we lack a lot of there's an incredible social fabric to the city that has kept the city and its culture alive, and we are internationally renowned for in creating movements and creating music and creating culture. But in terms of actual entities that support groups of people to organize in the arts and culture space, whether it be arts workers, artists, I feel like there's a real gap there. And from the work that I used to do at Culture Source, which is kind of doing that work as an art service organization, but then now as a funder supporting many different types of organizations on an individual basis, there's real opportunity for us to be supporting organizations in coming together and what they can get up to in, collectivity and collective power. And so with that, Margaret brought this idea, and I'm going to pass it over to her to share more about it. Oh, but also I wanted to share too that in funding this thing, this was a grant that we took not through our traditional route in terms of taking it to our board, but more a discretionary grant, which is through our president's discretionary fund, which we really use to benefit and fund things that impact many of our partners too. So the way in which this grant was even made to support the work that Margaret got up to was also kind of I was able to kind of use creativity in finding ways to support this too. So I just want to share a little bit about that for even people who might be navigating okay, how do I support this thing that might not fit into a very clean box from where I work too. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna pass it over to Margaret to share more about the teaching artist work.
Thank you so much, Adam. I am really excited to be here and to be able to speak about this. And in a second, I'm going to share some slides. I asked Adam about making some slides, and just as a human, I'm trying to improve my Canvas skills, so I get to try them out on you today. So I hope you enjoy. This was really an interesting turning point for me in a lot of ways. The conversation that Adam and I had, and I'll get to this when I get to the presentation part, but was this really refreshing thing where I was talking to a funder who I already knew, and so it was really comfortable, and I wasn't looking at it as far as please think that the thing I wrote for you is good enough to be funded. It was more of hey, what would you? So but I'm the executive director for Y Arts, which is the arts and humanities branch of the YMCA of Metropolitan Detroit. Arts at the Y is kind of a unicorn thing. Our branch is the only one of its kind in the country. There are individual YMCAs that have some arts programming, and that's really just sort of based on who works there, right? In upstate New York, there's a writing program, and in Long Beach, California, there's a media program for youth, and so there are pockets of it, but Detroit is very fortunate to have this arts focused branch. As you see, I'm in the pottery studio in our YMCA. So here, I'm going to share some stuff with you. Get started talking about right note here. Okay, so what we came up with was called the exchange, and it could not have been possible without this amazing conversation I had with Adam. So what is it and why did we do it? So Y Arts mission, as you see here, is to revitalize the spirit of the community by providing high quality, accessible arts experiences through this list: arts events, educational programs, artist networks, and cultivation and creative enterprises. Now you see, I all caps and arrowed this artist networks and cultivation portion. And that's because it's always been on our list. And it's always been something we wanted to do more of. I came to this program as a teaching artist. My background is initially theater, and then I was in the Second City when it was in Detroit. So I'm improv and sketch. So I was hired to teach young people sketch and writing and acting. And then everybody left, and eventually they moved me into a leadership role. But so it's a big passion for me to have this golden rule approach to how we treat our artists, right? As far as like competitive pay and never having them do anything for resume credit. But then there was this part that our board always wanted to do, which was create these networking opportunities and professional development. And anything we've ever sent our teaching artists to, and we keep anywhere from 15 to 20 artists on staff, anything we send them to. So,
Oh, you muted. There you go.
there we go. Anything that we send them to might have some relevance to what they do, like, you know, the same types of trainings that classroom teachers might have, but teaching artists is a really specific role. So there wasn't anything that existed in our sector specifically for them. And so that was like a really exciting need that we could fill. So Adam asked me, he asked me, if you had resources, what would you want to do? And I don't think anybody ever asked me that before, and not in such a comfortable way. So I'm getting better at asking for what I want in this life. And I said, hey, it would be kind of cool if we did this thing. And then he said, okay, let's do it. And that was another like really pleasant surprise. So so I had the opportunity to do this thing 10 years ago. My board said they wanted to do something along these lines. So this is like dream realized area for us. The first thing I did in approaching the work was to get the lay of the land. And part of it was, how needed is this thing? The answer very quickly came back, very needed. And then I went to other peer organizations, as well as organizations like Adam mentioned, like Culture Source, and the Youth Development Resource Center does a lot of like data and program quality assessment work. And they offer a lot of professional development in our sector. So I went to each of these, and then also along those lists too, like Detroit Public School folks that we work with, the Michigan Arts and Culture Council, College for Creative Studies, Inside Out Literary Arts, Detroit Creativity Project, and all these other organizations I had these meetings with to say, if you were going to do something like this, what would you want to see in it? Because I know what I like in a conference day or training, but I want to know, you know, what if I invite your artists, what would they want? And some of those conversations were really, really great, not only helpful in shaping the project, but then also building some momentum behind people wanting to come. And as someone, you know, from the YMCA, like our big focus is find a community need, fill that need, bring people together, and incubation is something that we're really known for. We're that space where people try things out. It's where basketball came from, and volleyball, and Father's Day, and Toastmasters, and a million other things, right? So this was a real opportunity for me not only to work in my personal mission as an artist, my professional mission as an arts administrator, and also within my particular organization's strength, the YMCA. So I talked to a lot of people. I spent the summer between programs talking to people about what we could do. And then I sat down with my staff. I only have 3 full-time staff here. We have a theater, and we have a gallery, and we have, so there's one person who runs that, and then there's one person who runs all of our programs, which predominantly happen out in the community. So what do we want this thing to be? And we knew we were going to use the Marlene Bowl Theater, which is our theater space. It's about 160 seats. And then we also have our art studio and another studio and some other meeting spaces within the Bowl Family YMCA, which is downtown Detroit. So we knew space-wise, we were set. But then it's a matter of like, okay, every professional development day you've ever been to, what do you like? What do you like? What don't you like? So we're not having anybody talk to us while we eat. That is my one, like, no way, no lunch speaker. But otherwise, what kind of breakouts do we want? There are things that every teaching artist would love to attend. And we that first year wanted to hit every single one of those. So how do you fund your practice as an artist? How do you handle the business of art? How do you manage a classroom? And how do you create an inclusive classroom? We set those right off the bat. We decided to have some facilitated conversations. I had seen that at a YMCA fundraising conference where it's just a table that's led, but the conversation is happening between the constituents versus just listening. We wanted to have a panel of some arts administrators and classroom teachers, and that to have perspective on like what they love in a teaching artist. And then, of course, we wanted to include some networking. So as always with pilots, we tried to keep it as simple as possible so it could be cleanly done, well done, strongly done. So we kept it as boiled down as possible and tried not to shove everything into the day that we possibly could. One of the things I was also very sure I wanted was that, yes, I wanted a very energetic speaker. It didn't need to be like a name. What I wanted it to be was someone who does the work, is passionate about the work, and can get people amped up about the work. So, and one of the cool things of this process was I got a lot of recommendations, and a lot of the people I brought in were people I hadn't really met until that day, but because of who recommended them to me, I knew we were going to have somebody great. And that was the case with Jasmine Parks. She's an instructor with Inside Out Literary, and they are a poetry program in Detroit, spoken word, and they do amazing work with youth. And she is incredibly talented and really got that vibe that we wanted, which was like, I know the job you do, and here's why it's amazing. Here's my experience of why it's amazing. Let's have an amazing day, right? So it really hit the note that we wanted to with the speaker right off the bat. And then for breakouts, so these were our breakout instructors, and they were from everywhere from CCS to one is a classroom teacher in a school in Detroit to working in the state capitol, working in arts administration. But I only knew two of these folks, and the other two came to me from recommendations. We had morning breakout sessions and afternoon, and people had to choose between two. So there wasn't a lot you would miss, but you did have to kind of prioritize which one, and they all went extremely well. And then there was everything else. So keep in mind the brunt of the planning of this event, which was a one-day event last November, and it was 9:30 to 3 or something like that, was entirely done by myself and our program director. The rest of the actual day, you know, some of our teaching artists and some board members and volunteers helped with, but as far as like putting everything together, so marketing, registration, all the badge stuff, the swag, the food, the volunteers, putting together all the people for the facilitated conversations, which was a handful of people, and all of the people on the panel. So that's, you know, sort of managing communication between you know, 3 different constituents of presenters plus a speaker. So it definitely was a lot of admin work, but I think when you're doing something that you are really excited to pilot and that, you know, like Adam put his trust and his organization's support behind it, it, it didn't seem like an ordeal because we really, really wanted to do. Here's the project timeline. So I think our first conversation was probably winter of 2025. And then over the summer, I had all of those conversations. And then you see it gets very small towards the end because our funding was secured in September and we put that event on in November. And a couple of times during the process, I thought, are we mad for trying to make this happen in this amount of time? But to be honest, it didn't matter. We were going to do it. And it all worked out extremely well. I will definitely start sooner with our program this year, which we already have on the calendar to get started. But as far as pilots go, I think it's one of those, since you haven't done it, you don't realize how bananas you are for trying to pull it off in that amount of time. So it worked out. And then we did some follow-up surveys with all of the participants. So we were aiming for between 40 and 50 participants. I think we had about 52 that were registered and about 44 that came to the event, which was an incredible win for us. One of the challenges we have with our programming, which I'm sure many people do, is we'll put together some really, really amazing stuff, and then it's kind of crickets as far as like attendance is concerned or trying to get it out to the right people. But I think that that portion of having those conversations at the front end with those organizations, and also to say, do you want to be part of this and not have to have my handout for the work to already be supported? Then I really was doing the kind of community work I want to do, which is like, I'm doing this as a benefit for all of us. I want all of the, because teaching artists work between different organizations. And if I strengthen mine and yours, we're all going to work with them probably at some point or another based on what kind of mediums you run in your programming. So, and since we do theater, visual arts, and media arts, there's overlap between other programs, but also I'm just an artist who wants artists to have opportunities. So to be able to have that program already supported and then just invite these organizations in, it strengthened our relationships in the arts community. It strengthened artists in the community, and it offered something of value without asking for anything in return. And I think that was a pretty incredible part of this. The vibe was pretty awesome that day, and some of it was just for people to have an opportunity to connect that with artists they didn't know before, and share their experiences, because sometimes if you're a teaching artist and you're out at a school alone, you there's nobody else to really share that experience with. You're all sort of out as islands doing things on your own. So this was an opportunity for them to compare notes. So in the feedback we got from people who participated, they were all incredibly positive about the energy and about the learning and about we asked about other breakouts you'd like to see in the future or anything that they would want to change. And honestly, most of the the criticisms or things to change were still kind of positive, right? So they wanted more networking time, which totally makes sense. That was a big great part of the day. They wanted a longer day or possibly even a multiple day event. So we want more of what you did is a pretty great thing to get back. And then to share contact information or rosters so that they can continue to network with one another. Another great thing there. So we're in the process of thinking through the event, which will be November 20th this year. And I've already talked to some of the people from last year who are interested in being involved. And we're already kind of starting to consider what we would like to change or improve from our last time around. But I really do think not only in our sector, within my organization, it was the opportunity to do something that hadn't been done, that needed to be done, and that I hope will have a really strong, lasting ripple effect in the arts community in Detroit for a very long time. At least I hope so. Hope that is part of our legacy here from Y Arts. So we'll be celebrating our 20th anniversary in 2027. And I think it's a really great time to establish something like this that I think will be a convening space for the development of artists in the future. That's most of what I planned. If there are questions, I'd be glad to answer anything anyone else has.
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, I have like just a few comments that I'll share too, just from my
Good stuff.
perspective in Perch. And then, yeah, if there's questions, people, please, jump in. This is very much conversational. But I think one thing I was thinking about and inviting you to, come speak to us today is like artist opportunities in Detroit are really tied around like fellowships and fellowship awards. And the context here too is that a lot of those artists are also teaching artists locally and or have jobs as well as, that either are in connection to their artistic practice or separate from it. And so, you know, there's not outside of those fellowship awards, which are very much, kind of held to a high degree here in the city, like there's not a lot of opportunities or networks of support for artists here locally. And so there's real kind of opportunity with this Teaching Artist Summit to be one of those networks of support. And and then I think another thing too is like there's a real the Urban Family Foundation also funds jazz too, like as a subset of our funding, because Fred Herb was like huge on jazz, and we fund a lot of jazz education partners who have work with teaching artists. And at least in the tradition of jazz, although I think I could argue it for this like city's arts and cultural traditions, there's a real tradition of mentorship too around like stewarding the next generation's like understanding of a form or of like a cultural practice. And I think teaching artists, at least in the jazz work, are like a huge, kind of professionalized way in which that stewardship and mentorship has continued. I mean, there's obviously lots of other spaces in which that have been really important to mentorship for lots of different types of arts entities. I mean, even in just like the jazz space, like the Black Church has been a really huge space in which mentorship happens, right? It's like the public school system as well, outside of just like the after school program that's funded through, by a foundation and as a nonprofit. So ways in which we could support things that are kind of continuing that tradition of mentorship and supporting the people who are really like the culture bearers of the form of the artistic practice through supporting this Teaching Artist Summit, I feel like is an indirect way of continuing to make sure that sector or those people who are doing that work are strengthened and at least well networked together too. What comes out of it, as long as it's like people getting to know each other and helps kind of retain like that connection, that's huge as well. And then I think just the last comment I'll make too is that at least for this spiel I'm giving too, but like professional development is so hard to fund or get funding for if you're at a nonprofit. Like it is just like, I mean, I think everybody has had that experience where it's like, okay, you only get so much professional development funding, or like here's your budget. But it is like one of the largest indicators of employee retention too. And so like even in thinking about teaching artists who oftentimes are just contractors and can go and work anywhere else, a lot of artists do end up leaving Detroit when they get a big award and moving to LA or New York. And that's like a big thing. It's in terms of retaining artists, like does funding the summit retain them? Maybe like, you can't say causality there necessarily, but I think the intention on our end is like, okay, through funding this, that could also help, retain people and make them feel more connected to their community, more connected to the work, and more connected to networks of artists. And that could help our entire arts ecosystem too. So I mean, it was really like that. And those are maybe all quite lofty statements to make following Margaret's work and this like one $10,000 grant that helped pay for this event, right? But like I think there's connections there to like artist networks and ways in which like we kind of saw, whether direct or indirect, whether causal or not, like supporting this does kind of help our larger arts ecosystem here in the metropolitan region too.
Yeah, to your point, and that's sort of why we built that into our mission statement is, from a YMCA standpoint, we're just always trying to help people reach their full potential, whether they're young, or adult or artist or not. But part of what makes our arts community stronger is to give meaningful, well-paid work to artists to try to keep them in our region, so they don't have to seek work outside of Detroit. And if they stay and then they mentor young people who then see arts as an actual career option, or to see like how these mentors are working as artists, then it becomes a potential for them, and then the whole thing is stronger. So.
Questions from the room? Things people are wondering about. Don't all go at once.
Probably just nailed it. That's all.
Yeah, boom. I mean, like, one thing I'm wondering, Margaret, is like, so based off of this, and like, obviously knowing the experience of being a teaching artist, knowing artists who are working and trying to find work and also, sustain their practices, like, where do you see there being opportunity for like additional supports or things that like, are there other things you're thinking about that like you heard from the group of like, hey, this is like really emerging as a need collectively here, and like how can we support in that, or like whether it be like something that you're just like thinking about addressing for like the next session, or whether it be, you know like a more larger scale dream vision for bringing
I
these people.
think one of the questions that came up a lot in this first one is who's this for? Meaning, is this for emerging artists who want to start out as teaching artists? Is this for established, or veterans? And initially, obviously, it was like yes, but I had a really interesting experience going into this. My husband, I'm an alumni of Wayne State University, and my husband works there as well in the College of Fine and Performing Communication Arts, and they have this like networking, they call it speed networking. And so I've volunteered on that before just to give like young people graduating the opportunity to talk to people in the arts community and get them comfortable with just like talking to strangers in a networking capacity. And I met this incredibly vibrant young artist at this, and and our event was just a couple weeks later, and I absolutely, you have to come to this, you have to, I want to hire you, you need to see this, because she didn't even know it was a job opportunity. And she came, and it was awesome. And all of the artists there that were established were like, fell in love with her. And they were like 3 organizations wanting to hire her. And she just emailed me recently, like, are you looking for anyone? And I'm going to, see if I can bring her on. But so I think that there is that opening portion that like, because when I got my theater degree, they were like, bye, see you, find something for yourself to do with that degree. There wasn't any like career services aspect going on. So I didn't know what a teaching artist even was. I had to work with a bunch of poets before I learned that you would like write grants for yourself or try to get fellowships or like all these other arts things. So I think as a bridge for emerging artists. Because the beauty of being a teaching artist is you can work in a flexible way and still be able to do your practice. It doesn't happen during the times if you're a performer that you would be, on stage necessarily. I mean, unless you do kids shows. And any of your other arts you're able to still do. So I think that front end is a place I would love to put some attention to. I even thought about maybe having like in the lobby like some tables with some organizations to talk about like, if they have job opportunities or like career fair vibe. Um, but I don't know. See.
Thanks, Margaret. I kind of question for the room since y'all don't have many questions, but I'm curious, like, just like, because this is something where like, and to bring it back to Jamie's, like, what are challenges for everybody in the group? I mean, one of the biggest challenges for our region is just like a lack of these like structured councils, spaces, intermediaries where organizing would happen. Organizing, whether it be like attending professional development workshops, like really kind of like tactical learning skills, or like organizing of like just bringing people together, like what do we want to see change? How do we like make change, whether it be like a subsection of, people at arts organizations or artists, or, or just like different, there's so many ways to slice the pie, right? And so that being a challenge for us, like, I mean, this I think was a clear fit because it's like, okay, this is a space in which, like organizations we support are organizing together. Why wouldn't we support that, right? And so I'm wondering, because that's like the situation here in our metropolitan area and a real gap. And yet when I go to other spaces, I see other places and spaces, I see there's more formalized organizing, or what seems to be more formalized or organizing. I'm wondering, like, in your communities where you work, like where do you see there being the like opportunities or challenges, or like what do you feel like you're doing well in terms of like organizing spaces with artists in mind? Like, is it mostly we've got a few fellowship programs and most of the artists are kind of going for that? Or like, are there organizations that you all kind of look to that really are well networked, supporting artists, doing things that are both tactical and really like basic, but then also maybe the things that are like really beyond and thinking like really vision forward, future forward? That's a really long, tangly question, but I'm just curious, like dispatch from the rest of the group. What's working, what's not?
I'm happy to hop in with my thoughts. I'm Genevieve Borgeson. I'm the VP of Community Impact at the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. And so we're based out of Portland, Oregon. And so we do have a building that's a hub, and we've been able to really kind of work to build up our immediate. We do have a suite of services program, which I think is kind of what we provide for some of that business training for artists. And we've been really successful in kind of housing that locally. But I think we're encountering similar challenges. We're a national organization as well. And so we're going into different communities. And I think we have to kind of reinvent the wheel and redo outreach every time we move into a different community. And so we recently had one in Arizona, and we were partnering with ASU to try and connect with their students and have grad students and undergrads as well as the creative community. And we're getting ready to put one forth in Tulsa as well. But I think we're having similar challenges of like, what are the networks and how do we create those lasting relationships that we can go back and tap back into? Because right now it just seems like every time we're going into a new community, we're having to connect with different people, build up those pathways, figure out how to create those systems if there isn't one in place of bringing the people to the table. And so yeah, I think we're trying to figure out how to translate our model in Portland, which has been useful to us, into these other sectors throughout the country, knowing that we have like a national focus. So, I mean, I think I don't know if that was an answer to your question, but more just I think empathizing with you that I think it's really difficult to build those networks of outreach and how to you know, like you said, make sure that when there isn't that infrastructure in place, that you're being responsive to the needs of the community, but also trying to like expand that network and build it for others to kind of leverage moving forward.
No, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think like just one immediate thought I'm having too is like, coming from this perspective of being at a spend down foundation, it's like, what investments are we making that will continue on and will continue to support our sector? And like, I think, being able to invest in those types of systems, things that support organizations, entities that do the work, like are kind of the most, I think that makes the most sense, right? But then it's like, okay, how do we do that? Or figure it out when there's such, like different kind of needs, different, like really like prioritizing. It sounds like that for you all is kind of also a challenge too, in a way of like, okay, this works in this one community, but how does it work in others? And how do we prioritize the approach or make it work feel realistically and feasibly?
Yeah, understanding the regional challenges that come forth when you're working in different networks or different re geographical places, and yeah, how to tailor that and make sure that you're including those local voices and allowing them to lead, but like how do you connect with the local voices and know who to work within that network? Yeah.
Yeah, and connecting with local voices and organizing when they're probably also working on a lot of other stuff too, right? And it's like, okay, that's going to take extra time to then figure out how to make this other thing happen that might be a dream, like what Margaret brought forward too. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Tony?
Yeah, kind of on the same vein of like, okay, so first of all, hi, I'm Tony. I work for Arrowhead Regional Arts Council. We're one of the 11 regional arts councils in Minnesota underneath the Legacy Amendment and Minnesota State Arts Board. And I say that um, my computer. I think we're back. There we go. Of course, right when I start speaking, it wants to do that. Anyways, so we have been bouncing around buildings for the past like 3 years because our original building, of course, is getting turned into luxury apartments. So We had to find a new home, but we just moved into the depot in downtown Duluth, which is like an old train depot that's been renovated and well, it's currently getting renovated and it has a bunch of nonprofits in there. But we are working on resource sharing a lot with these things because again, there's 11 regional arts councils. Every region in Minnesota is covered by an arts council. Ours is the largest geographically. So we go from Duluth all the way up to the Canadian border. Um, and there is just no way that, like, financially, people wise, that we can get to all these places in any given year. So we've been focusing a lot more on resource sharing where we can in the physical realm, but then also working towards, sorry, I'm trying to find like the words to partnering with organizations in these regions that we can't quite reach. But that has been the most difficult part, which I think is what you were kind of saying is like going after these networking opportunities is difficult because if you feel like you don't have the time, these organizations don't feel like they have the time for anything. So we've been doing a lot of more business side workshops on Zoom, which seems to be the best way to just get our name out there. And those have been really helpful. A really good organization that is doing a lot of these like kind of service focused things that for individual artists in Minnesota is Springboard for the Arts. And excuse me if I've gone super off topic, but they are doing really awesome stuff that's more service based rather than grant based, systems based financial support based. Everybody loves Springboard for the Arts. We had our Arts Advocacy Day at the Capitol for all of Minnesota like 2 weeks ago, and they threw out the after party. But I don't know where I went with that one. Again, my brain is not fully back from I don't know what time zone I'm in. But yeah, that's what I gotta say.
I'll pop
Adam,
in.
that's who that workbook was from, right? That you recommended to me, Springboard for the Arts?
Yeah, the Business Skills for Artists workbook. Highly
I
recommend.
just got my copy and I'm gonna use it myself, and we were thinking about using it for seeing about using it for the next event.
Yeah, if you reach out to them, they're really great about like working with orgs. Like we put on a tax income basics for individual artists seminar a few weeks ago through them, just because like we saw they had done it and we reached out and said, hey, we want to do that. So they gave us their slides. I mean, they unfortunately said they didn't have the time to like help us put it on, but they gave us the slides and said, if you find a tax advisor, here are the slides, have at it. And it was pretty great. I love them. They're all super nice too.
Laura, you were going to pop in?
Oh yeah, I'll pop in. I'm from Center for Cultural Innovation and we're headquartered in LA. We have an office in the Bay Area, that's where I'm based, but then we have some national initiatives. And I've been at CCI for almost 9 years. And when I first started, something that was drilled into me and which I really believe is like the two most important things in your professional career are knowledge and networks. Knowledge being a whole spectrum of things, but networks and people. And I think as an intermediary, we receive funding that we re-grant to the community. And I think Hewlett Foundation, I'll give them some props, has done an amazing job of investing in the networking infrastructure in the Bay Area. So investing in convenings, investing in organizations that foster like fellowships for emerging arts professionals, not just artists, but art professionals, so arts workers, artists. And right now we are in a moment of severe crisis in the Bay Area. A lot of organizations over the years have been shuttering, but it just feels like in the past like 6 months, it's like every day a new space is, or not a new space, but another space is closing. And so just a couple weeks ago, a couple organizations organized to bring like hundreds of people together at a space to talk about like, what the hell is going on? What can we do? How can we be there for each other? But also what can we do that can actively like give us some agency. And so I think a lot of that is just due to what's been kind of sown over the years of just foundations and institutions making that investment. And I think you already know that, but also if you're gonna, what's your leave behind, I think is investing in the infrastructure of these organizations so that they can continue to like build relationships and show up for their community. And there's like these also individuals in the community that are like these anchors that I think have been invested in, and now they can like step up and speak out when there's these moments of crisis, which we're encountering all the time.
Right, because like you don't want to be convening everybody for the first time in the moment of crisis, right? Like it's like the relationships like that then everybody can gather in spaces of not crisis and in spaces of crisis
Yeah.
together, right?
And our ambitious initiative, a big thing that they've been doing is it's a time limited 10-year initiative. And the thing that they've been working on the past few years is like just connecting people with each other, because obviously they're not going to be around forever, clearly, in a time limited initiative. So what's the leave behind? And it's making sure people are connected to one another that can be in solidarity and as part of the movement.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Laura. And I think like one thing that I mentioned earlier too is like that the like Detroit is really a city of people. I mean, what city isn't about a city of people, right? But like it's deeply a city of people knowing people. You don't walk down the street in Detroit without saying hi to who you're walking by. If you don't, like then you probably need to go somewhere else. Like we're not like to you coastal people, no shade, like we're not saying hi to people. So when I go to other places, other cities, I'm like, oh wait, you don't just greet everybody you're walking by, you know? So it's very much like based on relationships. And that I think has really held the city through so many things, whether it be the pandemic, whether it be the city's bankruptcy, whether it be, just like so many moments of racial injustice at the city at a large scale. So like I think, investing that in these types of things and networks, it really just helps preserve that and also helps in some ways formalize it more and make sure that it continues on too. And one person I draw inspiration from, like just and keep in the back of my mind with a lot of the networks thing, also coming from a intermediary formerly, is Grace Lee Boggs, who's a famous activist in Detroit. And she had this quote that was like, it's not critical mass that creates change, it's critical connections. And so really it's those connections between people that like, what Margaret's doing great, and also think of like, I mean, we may never know what connections were made in that space that then could flourish onward to do something great too. And I'm not just saying that because we funded this thing and it was so great and Margaret's here. Like, I'm just like, I think that's like just yeah, exactly. And because she put my picture in the PowerPoint, but like it is, I think that is like as a guiding principle is also key for this too.
The funny thing about it is it was kind of meta, right? Because I have been a little too Catholic upbringing a lot of my career, so I don't like ask for enough. And so I didn't realize that I had a network until I was tapping into the people that I was going to bring into this thing and the people that they were introducing me to. So it's one of those like when you go to teach, you learn kind of things. Like I, I wanted to make opportunities for people to network, and then I made all these connections, like my own self. So it was neat.
Any final reflections, comments, dispatches from where you're at?
I can chime in a little bit. Hi, everyone. I'm Steph Reyes, Program Officer at the Community Foundation in Western Massachusetts. So our work is very local, hyper local, I'll say. And something that came to mind, thank you, Margaret, for the presentation and all the work that you're doing. When you were talking, something that came to mind, when we started this initiative, we have a 10-year initiative with Bar Foundation, the Creative Commonwealth. We are in our 9th year now, so it's coming to an end, but the foundation will continue supporting this work. We started as the big intermediary in this area and the convener. And Now we are in a phase where we recognize that groups and community members are doing this work, and we are in this phase where we are supporting the self-organizing to artists and organizations. So that's something that we have been doing right now. We have a collaboration with Access for Artists, the service for artists organization, and we have some cohorts with them, and they're self-organizing. For example, our residency, and we have seen this a little change from us being the sole intermediary or convener to starting to invest more in community to self-organize.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And also exciting to hear that it's like pollinated outwards too, and been less on just you all as the funder too, right? And I think that's the other hope too. It's like, are funders really supposed to be the organizer? I think sometimes they can be, but other times it's just like fund the work that somebody's presenting to or about the organizing, right? Like, and like what's the, like should I in my work be really doing all the event planning and making it all happen, or should I just be making sure that something is funded that the community and constituents I work with and organizations I work with are bringing forward or uplifting and highlighting?
Indira speaking. I think something that I would also offer is I feel, going back to what you said, Adam, about critical connection, it also feels like I want to get into the continuity of that, right? Like sometimes you pour all of the funding into the event. And it's great, as you mentioned, you might have some key connections that happen, but because there isn't a lot of follow-up, if you will, that maybe leads up to the next event or something like that, I feel like that often becomes a gap that we're missing, or that could be filled. So I just wanted to put that in the space too, that not just funding the event itself, but it's also the follow-up, the same way we might do evaluation for a program, right? And I think that might yield additional information, particularly Margaret, with what you were sharing around the feedback that you received, especially because it seems like people want more of the networking, but they don't want to have to wait another year for when this like annual events happen. So what are the other opportunities that we're able to do in between, which I know requires resources. We know that space, but it's like, what are the other ways that we can kind of keep people invested and excited about the event, but also still continuing to deepen that dialogue along that journey? I think is something that often isn't thought about initially, that if we start to build that into these models, it could also support those critical connections being able to be sustained and even deepened, so we can have those structures be set up for organizing in a way that becomes almost, a way of life or a way of being, and not kind of waiting for these events, if you will. So just wanted to offer that as well. Thank you.
No, I love that. Thank you, Indira. I mean, like investing in the relationships, right? Like going beyond the one thing is so key. And that's really like, the relationship isn't just oh, I'm gonna see you at the event next year. It's like everybody's local. So there's really, I think there's opportunity there too.
And I'm just going to ping back in to say, and the opportunity there is also to be able to engage folks who may not be in arts and culture, but are interested in supporting arts and culture, which hopefully, Margaret, I'm saying this to you, that brings a different kind of dollar in, right? So you've got the folks who this is what they do because they're invested in arts and culture, but there are folks who recognize the importance of it, even though that might not be their industry. And so what are the opportunities for them to enter the space, whether that be financially or in other ways? And I think that's, again, continuing to create those connections and bridges, so that we have a stronger arts and culture ecosystem.
That's an
Right.
excellent point, because as anyone, I've had challenges activating my board since its inception. And this was like I think there's 7 of them, and I think 4 of them volunteered on the event. And it was a massive turning point for their interest in supporting our work. So I don't want to say everything changed after this, but it was a big deal.
Yeah, it's like education and workforce development funders. Where are you at? Like those other, I mean, that's what we need, right? We need the arts funding in each program area. I mean, yeah, 100%. We have 1 minute left. I mean, thank you, Margaret, for being here, for sharing what you've done with us, and also just, like your spirit and energy in this work. And thank you
Thank you for
everybody
having
for
me. What a treat.
And thank you everybody for sharing, what you've been through, things that are similar, things that are different. I mean, those are really helpful for, me and Margaret to hear, being in a space where we're like, okay, what are the kind of rudimentary things we need, and where can we, any sort of inspiration, we are taking it and running with it. So appreciate everything you all shared too.